State Farm sent its own engineer to the wreckage of the McIntosh house in Biloxi, Mississippi. He walked through what Hurricane Katrina had left behind, and he wrote it down in a report dated October 12, 2005. His conclusion was simple. The damage was primarily wind. Wind was covered. Wind meant State Farm would have to pay. So a manager took that report, and she wrote 5 words across the top. Not to the family, to the file. It said, "Put in the wind file. Do not pay, do not discuss." The family never saw the report, and they never got the money. This is not a story about a storm. The storm is only the setting. This is a story about a single piece of paper, an engineering report that told the truth, and the 5-word note that made it disappear. Because after a disaster, the second wave is never water. It's paper. It's the claim, the inspection, the file. And the file does not care what you lost. It only cares which box gets checked. Because after Katrina, thousands of families along the Gulf Coast heard the same word from their insurers. Not wind, water. And that one word decided everything. Whether a company had to pay or whether the bill got quietly handed to the federal government instead. Wind and water fell on the same houses in the same hours. But on paper, they could not both be true. One of them had to win, and whichever one won decided who wrote the check. By the time it was over, 2 former State Farm adjusters would carry documents out the door, a federal jury would use the word fraud, and a U.S. Court of Appeals would let that verdict stand. This is how a single note tried to bury a house. To understand the trick, you have to understand the paperwork. On the Gulf Coast, a homeowner often carried 2 separate policies. One was the ordinary homeowner policy, sold by a private company like State Farm, and it covered wind. The other was federal flood insurance, run by a government program called the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP, and it covered water. Same house, 2 different payers, and the line between them was invisible. It got drawn only after the storm by an adjuster with a clipboard. When a home was hit by wind and a wall of water in the same violent hour, someone had to decide which one did it. And here's the part that mattered. If it was wind, State Farm paid out of its own pocket. If it was water, the bill went to the federal flood program, to taxpayers. The McIntosh home in Biloxi was destroyed. The total loss was more than $1 million. State Farm's homeowner payout was $36,228. Say those 2 numbers back to back. More than $1 million lost. $36,000 paid. That is not a discount. That is a door closing. They called it surge. They called it water. But there was a problem with calling it water. State Farm's own expert had already said otherwise. The company hired a forensic engineer named Brian Ford to inspect the McIntosh property. On October 12, 2005, Ford filed his report. His finding was that the damage was primarily wind, the very thing State Farm's homeowner policy was supposed to cover. That report should have opened the door to a full payout. Instead, it vanished from the family's file. Because a catastrophe manager named Alexis King, known inside the company as Lecky, attached her note. 5 words that told everyone downstream what to do with an inconvenient truth. Put in the wind file. Do not pay bill. Do not discuss. In the court record that followed, she would be described as the architect and enforcer of the scheme. Not a rogue clerk, a manager, doing it on paper. And that is the thing that makes this story different from a mistake. A mistake is loud. It's a wrong number, a lost form, a slammed door. This was quiet. This was calm handwriting on a clip, telling the machine what answer to reach before the family ever asked the question. If the McIntosh file were the only one, you could call it a mistake. But it was not the only one. Across the Gulf Coast, hundreds of homeowners were fighting the same fight, the same word coming back at them. Water, not wind. The pattern was always the same shape. Losses that a private insurer would have owed were being pushed onto the federal flood program instead. The taxpayer picking up a tab that a company had promised to carry. And here is the quiet part. When a company shifts a loss from its own books onto the flood program, it does not just save money. It saves its own money and spends yours. One word on a form, multiplied across a coastline, and almost nobody on the outside could see how the sausage was being made, because the reports that told the truth were being buried in wind files marked "Do Not Discuss." Here's where the paper trail turned on the people who wrote it. Two of State Farm's own adjusters, sisters Corey and Carrie Rigsby, saw what was happening from the inside. They saw the reports that said wind, and they saw them getting reclassified as water. So they did something the company never planned for. They carried the documents out the door. Then they filed a lawsuit, not just for themselves, but on behalf of the United States government, under a federal law called the False Claims Act. It has an old nickname, qui tam. It's a law built for exactly this moment. For the person on the inside who sees a contractor cheating the government and decides to say so out loud. The insider sues in the government's name, and if it works, they share in whatever the government gets back. It turns a witness into a plaintiff. It turns a smuggled document into a case. The claim here was blunt. State Farm had defrauded the federal flood program by dumping its own wind liability onto it. In 2013, a federal jury agreed. They found that State Farm had committed fraud. State Farm denied any wrongdoing, and it appealed. But on July 13, 2015, the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the verdict. The court's award was roughly $750,000 in damages. The sisters, as whistleblowers, kept about 30%. The government took the rest, and the legal fees ran to nearly $3 million. The number itself was small. What it stood for was not. A federal court had looked at the wind files and the buried report and the 5-word note and let a jury's word for it stand. Now be careful with the ending, because it does not close as neatly as you'd want. The McIntosh house in Biloxi was never rebuilt with State Farm's money. And in a later court proceeding, one of the McIntoshes actually said State Farm had done the right thing. This was never a clean rescue of one family. That is not what the record proves. What the record proves is smaller and colder than a rescue. It proves the note existed. It proves the report said wind. It proves a manager ordered it into silence, and that a federal jury and then a federal appeals court refused to look away from it. Because paper is a strange kind of weapon. The same note that was meant to hide the truth became the evidence that proved it. Two adjusters carried it out the door. A federal court read it back. So here's the question this one leaves behind. Somewhere in a file with your name on it, a claim, an inspection, a report you were never meant to read, something may already have been decided about you. In 5 words, not sent to you, sent to the file. We read the fine print so you don't have to. This is the fine print.